The views, information, or opinions expressed during the Seeds of Wellbeing series are solely those of the individuals involved and do not necessarily represent those of the University of Hawaii College of Tropical Agriculture and Human Resources, or funders, and any affiliated organizations involved in this project. Welcome to a Seeds of Wellbeing Voices from the Field podcast featuring voices of Hawaii agriculture producers for Hawaii agriculture producers. These podcasts are made possible by a grant from the University of Hawaii College of Tropical Agriculture and Human Resources, also known as CTAR, and the Seeds of Wellbeing, or SO project, and is supported by a grant from the U.S. Department of Agriculture, National Institute of Food and Agriculture, and the Hawaii Department of Agriculture.
And I just fell in love with ʻUlu from a culinary standpoint. That was my first real connection with breadfruit. It was, it's a more versatile ingredient than any other ingredient I had ever played with because it's a starch, but it's a fruit and it grows on a tree and it goes through the maturity stages. It's just very unique. And so I got really into it. That first year, I think my cooking contest submission was an ʻulu white honey pound cake with ʻulu cardamom ice cream or something like that. So I was combining all the ingredients I was working with.
In this episode, we speak with Dana Shapiro from Hawaiʻi Ulu Coop, who shares her journey from working with local chef Peter Merrimen to facilitate an AgVentures program to helping found and now manage the Ulu Co-op as its chief executive officer on Hawaii Island, where it all started. We also discuss expansion of the co-op over the years to now include the islands of Oahu, Maui, and Kauai, and crops that now include taro, sweet potato, and squash, as well as ulu. Aloha, and welcome to another Seeds of Wellbeing podcast, Voices from the Field. Today we have with us Dana Shapiro, who's CEO and General Manager for Hawaiʻi Ulu Coop. Is it Ulu Co-op or Ulu Cooperative? Which do you prefer?
We like ʻUlu Co-op. It's shorter.
Right. Yeah, shorter is better. Eat breadfruit, right?
Yeah.
Keep it simple. So welcome, Dana. Appreciate you coming on the podcast with us to talk a little bit about the Hawaiʻi Ulu Co-op.
Happy to be here. Thanks for the invite.
So just give us a little background. I usually like to start with people's, I guess I'm calling them Hawaii stories, right? How did you get to Hawaii? From what I could glean online, it looks like it was a pretty quick shift from grad school to Big Island, with maybe a short stint of selling honey and then like a strong focus in rural development, co-op development, and then kind of quick, for me, I guess it was kind of quick launch. In my mind, it was a quick launch right into the Ulu Co-op. But if you want to just kind of give us a little background on how you got here and how things started with the Ulu Co-op.
Sure. So let's see. I came to Hawaii for the very first time in my life when I was an undergrad at Cornell, and I had the opportunity to spend a semester and a summer here, kind of studying environmental science, and that led to a internship with Peter Merrimen, the chef, at his flagship restaurant in Waimea on the Big Island. And this was in 2005, and at the time, the restaurant had a partnership with the Hawaii Farm Bureau to do an agritourism project out of the restaurant called AgVentures. So this is about almost 20 years ago now. And basically, I was hired to coordinate the agritourism program, which involved working with a bunch of farmers in the Waimea, Ahualoa area, and then coordinating tours where people would come to the restaurant. I would drive them in a van to see like 3 or 4 farms, and then we'd come back to the restaurant for a lunch made out of a lot of those ingredients that they saw. And it was the white honey from Volcano Island Honey Company, now called Rare Hawaiian Honey, I believe. It was Honopua Farms spinach and beets. It was Long Ears coffee, and it was Hawaii Island goat dairy, those 4 farms. And it was an amazing experience, and I built some great relationships with those farmers, and we stayed in touch. And so then when I finished grad school, which I did in Israel, which is where I'm originally from, I'm from a kibbutz, which is like a cooperative farming community. So when I finished grad school, I came back and visited some of those farmer friends that I made, in particular, Richard Spiegel from Volcano Island Honey Company. And I basically never left after that. He ended up offering me a job. I never left the honey farm from after I came back to Hawaii. I just stayed on the honey farm. And then my grad work in Israel was really looking into co-op business strategies. And so I was interested in cooperatives, from from long ago. It's part of my personal history. My family's history is in the cooperative movement. And so I ended up branching out from the honey farm to do cooperative and rural business development work with the Kohala Center and as an independent contractor as well. And I actually got introduced to breadfruit through one of my coworkers at the honey farm, Andrea Dean, who was one of the directors of Ho'oulu Ka'ulu's breadfruit initiative. This is now, 2010, 2011. And there was a series of breadfruit festivals that they organized on Hawaii Island at the Amy Greenwell Garden, and another one in Puna. And I got roped into being a super volunteer, and they had a cooking contest at the festival, and I love to cook, and I really was very unfamiliar with ulu. I'd heard of it, but I hadn't tried cooking with it too much myself. So I was inspired, by just the challenge and to try something new. And I just fell in love with ulu from a culinary standpoint. That was my first real connection with breadfruit. It was, it's a more versatile ingredient than any other ingredient I had ever played with, because it's a starch, but it's a fruit and it grows on a tree and it goes through the maturity stages. It's just very unique. And so I got really into it. That first year, I think my cooking contest submission was an ulu white honey pound cake with ulu cardamom ice cream or something like that. So I was combining all the ingredients I was working with. And then the next year, I actually joined the planning board of the festival. And that's where I met my husband, Noah Lincoln, who works at UH as the professor of indigenous crops and cropping systems. But he really opened my eyes to the traditional cropping systems, right, through which the Hawaiians grew ulu and a bunch of other crops. And I didn't realize how abundant those food production systems were and sustainable. And it was just so inspiring to learn that not very long ago, Hawaii was really a model for the world in terms of the productivity and sustainability of farming practices. And, Hawaii's farming systems traditionally were very diverse. They weren't all agroforestry. They weren't all kalolo'i. There was both sides of the spectrum and everything in between. But I think the dryland agroforestry systems in particular, I just really fell in love with. They're beautiful. They're so innovative. We don't even understand all the different techniques that were used. And so Noah and I set off a few years after connecting with each other to start our own farm. And we wanted it to be in the Kalu'ulu, that part of South Kona, which is where Noah's originally from. And so we ended up getting a farm site through Kamehameha Schools, where we started trying to restore a piece of the Kalu'ulu. And because of my co-op background, I saw just the challenge of kind of making that model work as an individual farm because of the economy of scale challenge. And with breadfruit, it has a short shelf life and it can be intensely seasonal, where you get a ton of fruit in 1 month of the year and then not a whole lot. And so just how do you build business viability that way as an individual farm? It's very difficult. You'd need a lot of capital. And so we started exploring, well, is there enough interest from other farmers to maybe start a co-op and pursue this big vision together so that we can be more successful and faster, right? By combining our crop and reach economies of scale faster and all that stuff. And pretty early on, so this is now maybe 2015, 2016, we met two other farmers, Max Bowman in Hamakua and Lauren and Tom Dement, who were down in Puna at the time. And they were very similar sort of vision to us and very similar stage of their farm enterprises where they had just started planting. So none of us could really be viable on our own. And you need 3 farms to start a farmer cooperative in Hawaii. That's the minimum. You need 3. And so we kind of knew we could do it. But because of my co-op development background, I was familiar with like best practices for starting a co-op. And generally the way, they recommend going about it is putting together a feasibility study, a business plan, right? Getting the numbers together, having a community meeting, spreading the word, keeping it really open, getting feedback, all that stuff. So, I kind of went through that process. And we had a community meeting in Waimea in 2016. And there were maybe 15 or 20 farms there. And out of that first meeting, there were 9 farms who were really interested, including our farm, Max, Tom, and Lauren, and then 6 others. And so we had a follow-up meeting a few months later in Hilo, and we incorporated then and there, and that was July of 2016. So it's been exactly 8 years, and that's how the co-op came about.
Yeah, 8 years ago and 9 farms. Am I right?
9 farms.
9 farms. Wow. And did you get assistance for any of the development from Kamehameha schools early on for maybe just farmland at that stage? But I feel like there's a pretty strong connection between you folks and Kamehameha schools, because on one of our other podcasts that we have, which folks can check the show notes for the links, but I know they spoke about a long-term relationship with Ulu Co-op, and I was just kind of curious about that connection. Like I know in Hilo, you folks are right next door to one another.
Yeah, the relationship is multifaceted. On the farm level, we have a KS farm lease, and we were part of the Mahiai Matchup program is how we got our farm. That was in 2015. And then lots of other co-op members are KS lessees. I mean, KS is a huge private landowner, right? And they have a lot of farmland is KS land. So it's, I think, natural for a lot of our farmers to be KS lessees, especially on Hawaii Island, where they have a really big presence. But on the co-op level, we do rent a facility from them. So we have 2 Hawaii Island facilities, and the East facility in Hilo is a KS site. We've also partnered with KS in a bunch of other ways around education, both at their schools and for farmers. We've done several kind of farmer workshop series that they've supported. We also were actually their first investee of their food fund that they launched in 2021. So they've invested in the co-op, and there's probably more ways. We supply some of their cafeterias, which is awesome. Their cafeterias, I think, are really leading the charge in Hawaii in terms of farm to school and actually bringing local produce into the cafeterias. So, yeah.
Absolutely. It sounds like you have a kind of an ongoing strong connection with chefs, right? I think, don't you have a cookbook that the co-op co-branded with a pretty famous chef?
Yep, Sam Choi, we do. Yep.
So that early experience sounds like it probably comes in handy. Nice.
Yeah.
So let's see, 8 years later, 150 plus members.
Yep, 160,
probably
about 160 right now.
Yeah, and staff, I imagine staff of 1 part probably when you started, and
Yeah.
it looks like you've been CEO and general manager since day 1. Is that right?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Yeah, we have a staff of about 30 now.
Wow. And when did you make the leap from just the big island of Hawaii to starting to add Oahu and Maui and where else are you? Kauai.
Our first neighbor island member was Hana Ranch, and they joined the co-op in 2018, I believe. I believe John Cadman, who was a mentor for us since early on, of Maui Breadfruit Company, I think he introduced us because Hana Ranch had more fruit than he could absorb through his business. So he suggested they look to the co-op as a market outlet. And so they were our first neighbor island member. And then our first Oahu neighbor island member was Kahumana Organic Farms. And I believe they joined in 2020, so a few years later. And then a few years after that, our first Kauai neighbor island member joined the ward Ohana in Kilauea. So it's been gradual. It's been, I would say, a very organic process. We haven't really pushed membership on neighbor islands or on Hawaii Island. Our membership growth has been really organic, I think just mostly through word of mouth. We do try to share information about membership whenever we can, but we haven't done any kind of like recruitment campaign. When neighbor island farmers come to us, it's a little bit tricky because we don't have facilities on any other island. And so we've had to figure out how to support those members through partnerships, both to aggregate their fruit, to receive it, and then to process it. Our goal is to keep ulu produced on each island on that island all the way through the value chain, so it ends up being consumed on that island. We want to do that to save on shipping costs, to be more sustainable from an environmental standpoint, but also from a food security standpoint. Every island really needs its own, foundation for food, for staple food in particular. And so it just seems like the right way to go. That said, it's not easy. And developing all those linkages from a logistical standpoint to, commercial kitchen and then building the market and connecting all the dots is really difficult. So we still do a little bit of inter-island fresh fruit transport now. We try to keep it to a minimum, and we really just use it as a safety net in the event that something happens and our partners, can't handle as much fruit as is coming at peak season, or if something falls through the cracks, with logistics on that island, then our Hawaii Island facilities can sort of absorb all the excess. And that's how it currently works.
Well, a lot of moving parts, it sounds like, especially with a fairly perishable crop, right?
Yeah.
Yeah. So you mentioned organic growth of Ulu Co-op. Organic, I don't believe, is a requirement to be a grower for Ulu Co-op, is it?
It's not. In fact, we're not certified organic ourselves. Like, our products and our facilities are not certified organic. It's something that we've been kind of open to and looking at since we started, but the fact of the matter is that most of our farmers aren't certified and really aren't interested in being certified. That's not to say they don't practice organic methods. They just don't have an interest in going through the certification process. And I think it makes a lot of sense because the premium for certified organic, I don't think can go that much higher. Local produce in Hawaii is already really expensive to grow, and it's already basically a premium product on the market by virtue of being small scale, local, and almost all of our farmers are, highly diversified and use environmentally responsible methods. We do have our own kind of standards within the cooperative. Our board has actually been working on updating our production policy for the last few months. It's almost done. But we really try to support our farmers where they're at. And our farmers are so diverse, one from the other. The mix of crops that they grow on their farm, where they're located, what kind of issues they might be dealing with, like invasive species, for example, pest pressures, pigs and other ungulates, and then just their socio-demographic situation, right? What's their cultural background? What are they familiar with? There's so much diversity. It's amazing. I think it's a beautiful thing, but it doesn't lend itself to a one size fits all approach. So that's why we've maintained this like pretty flexible standard where we just try to support our farmers wherever they are at to get to a place of regenerative agroforestry.
Yeah, it sounds like we hear that quite a bit, I think, with folks we talk to through Sweet Seeds of Wellbeing. I mean, you have to be flexible. You have to appeal to, the 7,000 farmers that there are on the islands. I think 75% or more are very small scale. But most of the folks I talk to, I have to say, are using organic methods. They're just not sure if it's worth the overhead to ramp up to certified organic. But there are a few options out there, and I think everyone is kind of in a similar place to where I hear you are, which is just, meeting people where they are, and let's get food out there and yeah, and educate, right? Educate
Right.
about some of the organic methods that are valuable.
Hmm.
One more organic question. Organic Valley.
Hmm.
Tell me about your connection with Organic Valley.
So we were really fortunate that we had a USDA grant called the Socially Disadvantaged Growers Grant, or SDGG, a few years ago, that provided us with some funding to bring a co-op mentor to our annual member meeting. And I think the way we wrote it into the grant was super general. We just said we will find an experienced co-op representative to come and share with us about their, more developed co-op experience. And Organic Valley was just, I don't know, a poster child for me personally after we started researching, well, what co-ops might, want to mentor us, adopt us as a little sister. And so I just cold emailed them several times. And finally, somehow my email got pushed up to the senior VP of membership, and he responded. And his name is Travis Forgs. He actually just recently retired from Organic Valley to focus on his own dairy farm with his wife. But that was just recently. But he just was so generous with his time and really took us under his wing. And he came out and he did deliver the keynote at our annual member meeting in 2022 or 2021. I forget. It was around those years. But he went so far beyond that. He ended up inviting us to his annual member meeting about six months later, maybe it was a year later, and just hosted us in Wisconsin for a week so that we could really understand how Organic Valley does things. We got to meet the founding CEO and CFO of Organic Valley, both of whom have now retired from the business. So we learned so much from them, and we do stay in touch. Organic Valley is really interesting because they're one of the biggest co-ops in the US. I believe they have over 2,000 members, and they're actually international. They have a presence in Australia and the UK with membership. They also have some advantage of being in the middle of the continent, literally in the Midwest, that is one of the challenges that we deal with here, which is they actually work with a lot of co-packers. So they really focus on supporting their farmers with organic dairy practices and then getting the milk. They have a massive kind of logistics program where they pick up the milk from their farmers. But then to process the milk into, they have probably hundreds of SKUs. They work with co-packers all over the continental US. And here in Hawaii, we really lack an ag manufacturing sector. So a huge part of what the co-op has had to do over the last 8 years is build a manufacturing capacity, which is like, that's not what we set out to do. But we don't have co-packers here that we can drop on, aggregate our farmers' ulu and say, okay, make it into chips or make it into whatever we want. So we've had to build that. And that's been just a huge, really investment requirement. It takes a lot of capital to build the infrastructure and buy the equipment and so forth. But yeah, so that's our connection to Organic Valley, and they've just been super supportive and helpful for us in our journey.
And my sense is you folks have and do travel the globe trying to find best resources to tap for knowledge and help. So that's kind of great to see.
Mhm.
Yeah, I think, speaking of building, it feels like a key piece you decided needed to happen early on was educating folks about the value and the palette of canoe craps, the ono as Kamehameha schools would call it.
Mhm.
Um, and so I think was that something you knew right off the bat you had to do, is to get people to understand the breadfruit and canoe crops in general? Is that something you took on specifically, or did it just become obvious when you started that people just didn't get it?
Yeah, it became obvious once we started. That's exactly what happened. So like my first, task, so to speak, once the co-op was formed and I became the general manager, was to sell the fruit, because we formed in the summer and the season is usually late summer throughout fall. And so our 9 founding members, I think in that first season, harvested like almost 20,000 pounds of fruit. And one of our founding members were Jackie and John from Sweet King Cafe. And so that first season, we operated out of their cafe, the back of the kitchen. And they've been just absolutely tremendous supporters and shepherds of this whole co-op. But I had to sell ʻUlu fast, was essentially what I'm trying to say. And early on, I didn't know what our target market would be or who would be most receptive. So I literally just sort of peddled ʻUlu up and down the street and, tried to meet with chefs and restaurants and whoever would be willing to listen to us. And it became clear very quickly that there was a massive education problem, that people, don't eat ʻUlu or other canoe crops in general. Now, there's certainly groups of people in Hawaii that do, especially Native Hawaiians and other Pacific Island populations, for whom ʻUlu is still a staple crop, but unfortunately that's a minority. And most people today simply don't eat ʻUlu. They don't eat ʻUlu, they don't eat kalo, they don't eat local starches, period. I think their consumption of local crops is probably limited to cucumbers and fish, which is great, but we need staple foods as well. And so, yes, it became clear very quickly that we needed an educational campaign to sort of bring awareness to people, just of these crops to people's consciousness, education on how to use them and why, all the benefits. I think that the benefits do resonate with people, but they don't know for the most part.
Well, they won't know until they try, and I think you're helping a lot of folks try that may not have otherwise. But yeah, I think, and you expanded now, canoe crops being the ones brought in the first canoes, right? Our, breadfruit or ʻulu is kalo or taro is another, uala, sweet potato, and then you added one more recently, pumpkin.
Yeah, and pumpkin's not a canoe crop, although it
Right.
is an indigenous crop to North America. But yeah, we added on pumpkin because our farmers grow it and they grow it in conjunction with breadfruit. And it's a really great complement to the other suite of canoe crops, kind of for its role in the ecosystem. And it is also, it can be eaten as a staple starch. So
Yeah, it's kind of fun to grow too, I think. I
find these little prizes throughout the
know.
garden. Yeah.
I like it. Yeah, so I think you've expanded that over the years. Is that because you found a market for it? It looks like you're doing some wholesale, as well as connecting with schools. Like you have a number of channels now, not just consumers and grocery stores, but is it because of demand that you heard from folks out there, or is it because your farmers were growing it and what needed a channel, or how did that expansion into those other crops come about?
Oh yeah, that's a great question. So actually, it originally started through a partnership with the Department of Education in 2018. We started working with the DOE. This is, more than 6 years ago now, probably 6.5 years ago. And at the time, DOE had their Aina Pono farm to school program, which they ended. They don't do it anymore, but it was a very effective program from our standpoint. And they started buying ʻUlu from us for school meals. And then a really wonderful thing happened, which is that both of us got a USDA farm to school grant at the same time for kind of separate but related work. And that grant forced all the grantees to go to Detroit for a conference. And so it's funny, sometimes you have to leave Hawaii to like have real conversations with people from Hawaii because everyone is just so busy here and in their little silo. But me and Dex Kishida, who's now the deputy chair of DOA, at the time he was the farm to school coordinator for DOE, we had like 3 days forced to be together. No, he's fantastic. But I mean, the USDA did kind of force us to come together in Detroit. And we were able to literally sit down and map out like what local crops does DOE want? What local crops do our farmers grow? Where do those two lists overlap? And we came up with uala, sweet potato, papaya, banana. And at the time, we did find a way to supply those 3 crops in addition to ulu to the schools. And that partnership continued until the pandemic hit in March of 2020. And kind of the whole farm to school program for D unraveled at that time. And they're putting the pieces back together now, which is great. But that was our first start into what we now call co-crops. And we use the term co-crops because we're very ulu centric. And so everything that's not ulu is a co-crop to ulu because it can be grown in a diversified agroforestry setting. And that's what we try to encourage our farmers to do. So not just to plant a field of sweet potato, but to intercrop and do an alley of sweet potato when the breadfruit trees are young, for example. And the same can be done with kalo and pumpkin, although pumpkin, I think, seems to be maybe more appropriate for like a slightly more mature breadfruit orchard where the young pumpkin starts can get some shade. So there's all these really interesting and beautiful ways that you can combine these crops with ulu. And so after the DOE farm to school program kind of, went on a big pause due to COVID, we had to find other markets for our co-crops. Because they were the primary buyer for the co-crops up until that time. And we learned that the outside world, outside of DOE, had some different requests for co-crops than DOE had. And that's when we really started developing kalo and pumpkin, was after the pandemic started. And we are continuing to diversify our offerings. We have to strike a balance between, not working with too many different crops or too many different products, but also trying to support the diversity of our farmers. And it's great for our farmers, but it's also great for the co-op because ulu is a seasonal crop. It's a relatively unpredictable crop from year to year, as you know, Jim. It's really hard to predict, like, what are your trees going to do? When are they going to fruit? How much fruit is coming? It's just the nature of the crop in Hawaii, I think. And so it's a resilience strategy. It's a risk mitigation strategy for the co-op as much as it is for our farmers to not only focus on one crop. But some of the considerations that we think about are, can the crop be sold fresh? If it can be sold fresh, if there's demand for that, like avocados is a great example. We've been starting to do a lot more avocados. Then we don't need to process it, and that's a lot simpler. And the farmer can get a higher, portion of the end product when it doesn't have to be processed. If it can't be sold fresh, or if there's not enough demand for fresh, does it fit into our existing processing operation? Can it go through the same kind of machinery and be a similar enough end product? And if neither of those things are true, for example, with mac nuts, there's a big need for mac nut marketing right now in the mac nut industry. But mac nuts, really can't be sold raw because of salmonella, and it doesn't fit into our minimal processing operation at all. So in that case, we see if the farmers can actually do the processing on their end, and then the co-op can step in to help market. So we kind of have a 3-tier program when we assess additional crops. We also try to limit any crops we work with to those that our members are growing collectively. So if it's just one member growing a crop, probably doesn't make sense for the co-op to get involved. If it's, a group of farmers who aren't co-op members, not our core beneficiary group. So we have to sort of really focus on our member needs. And that's a critical part of being a co-op. It's something that we try to really focus on and not, have mission drift by getting distracted by things that aren't benefiting our membership. That's what being a co-op is about.
I know it seems like it's getting so much more and more complex, right? Because the more crops you add, they all have their unique needs. And are you actually opening it up for those other crops on the other islands, or is that just the Big Island where you're doing sweet potato and kalo and pumpkin?
So far, it's only been on the Big Island.
Yeah, I'm exhausted just thinking about the logistics of trying to do that on all the other islands. So yeah.
Yeah.
Okay. And speaking of all the things you're doing, that you're also helping facilitate some grants. Is that correct?
Yeah, the co-op is currently involved with 2 USDA Partnership for Climate Smart Commodity Grants, which was one of the Biden administration's like new initiatives. I think it was under the IRA, the Inflation Reduction Act. So this is a program that launched, it must have been in 2022, and the co-op is a partner on 2 different projects that got funded. One of them is called the Hawaii Climate Smart Commodity Project, or HICSC, and the lead organization is Linker. They're working really closely with the University of Hawaii and a whole bunch of other partners locally. That project covers a whole suite of climate smart farming practices, from composting and mulching to agroforestry. And farmers all over Hawaii are able to apply. I believe the next application cycle is going to open in November or December, somewhere around there. The second project that we're involved in, the lead organization, is the Nature Conservancy. That project is all about agroforestry, and it's called the Expanding Agroforestry Project, or EAP. For that project, it actually covers 38 states, and we are the Hawaii state lead. So anybody in Hawaii, again, is eligible to apply, and we would be the point organization for you. There's a bunch of information about it on our farmer website, which is ulu.coop. If you just go to that website, ulu.coop, the EAP is the first thing you'll see on the homepage. And that one funds 3 types of agroforestry. So the USDA recognizes 5 agroforestry techniques, and this grant will only support 3 of them. That's silvopasture, the integration of trees and livestock; alley cropping, which is basically combining, trees with at least one other crop in kind of a linear fashion; and the third one is windbreaks. And windbreaks are self-explanatory, basically using trees, as wind protection for other crops or livestock or other trees.
Nice.
Um,
And again, just to be clear, you don't need to be a member of the Ulu Co-op in order to access these funds.
don't. You don't.
And just as an example, I, as a farmer, really need some windbreaks, which is true, actually. Not just making it up. But if I could get grant money to help me plant my windbreaks, it's that easy?
Yes.
Nice.
Well, it's not easy, unfortunately. I don't know that any grant money is easy. But yeah, I would say the main criteria that both programs are looking for is commercial production. So as the name suggests, climate smart commodity, they're really looking, the purpose of this funding from the USDA is to help incentivize like a transition of US agriculture to be more climate friendly. But they're really looking at commercial producers. So if you're a backyard grower or a community nonprofit that wants to give away all the produce at the end of the day, that's great, but this wouldn't be the right grant opportunity for you. This is really targeting commercial or aspiring commercial farmers.
Great. And I can put links in the show notes to some of those places that you're mentioning, and I think make it easier for folks to find. Wow. So 8 years, you've come a long way. Oh my goodness. What do you see in the future? What do you see Hawaiʻi Ulu Co-op in 5 years, let's say?
Gosh, that is a hard question, Jim.
You make it 2 years if that's easy. I mean, farming, right? So you can't plan more than 2 years anyway, really. But
Well, I mean, in 5 years, I'm really hopeful, and this is my big thrust right now, is that the co-op will be in a place of economic viability without grant support. We are basically subsidized by grants still to do, all the many things that we do, including all the farmer technical assistance, like to administer those grants, which I think makes sense. But we're trying to get to a place where our core business is supported by the sale of our farmer's crop, and we're not there yet. I think it's an economy of scale issue, and our combined kind of intake volumes over the last 2 years has been between 400,000 and 500,000 pounds. And I think we need to get to more like 1 million pounds before we're going to be able to break even. I also hope, and this goes hand in hand, is that a lot more of our farmers fruit will be coming in. So the co-op currently has about 160 members and collectively about 6,500 trees planted. But most of those trees are actually not bearing fruit yet. They're young. We expect trees to start fruiting around 5 years of age. Some trees fruit sooner, especially if they're in lower elevations, like right on ocean level. And if there's, great management practices, lots of regular fertilization and stuff like that. But some trees can take longer. Some trees are actually haven't been planted in the best habitat for ulu. Even on our farm, which is in the heart of the Kalu Ulu, we didn't realize that it was kind of like this kipuka of a really super young lava flow, and our trees are not doing as well as a bunch of our neighbors' trees. So some things you don't find out until you try. And with a tree crop, you might not find out for 7 years, which is, a huge challenge. We're just adding another challenge to farming. But I do hope that in 5 years, we're going to see just a lot more production from our farmers, and our farmers having an easier time managing. Now, do I think that will happen? I think it's going to take a lot of work, not just for us and our farmers, but the whole community of ag in Hawaii. The onslaught of invasive species that our farmers have to adapt to year after year is, what's the word? It is untenable. It can't continue. And so that's a systemic problem that is beyond the control of the co-op or our farmers. We need the state, Department of Ag, the legislature, tourism authority. We need everyone to get way more serious about solving these systemic challenges that really plague our ag industry. And that's one of the reasons why it's really hard for me to predict, what the next 5 or 10 years will bring, because there's a lot of factors that are outside of our control. And we clearly work very hard to do as much as we can, but there's a lot of things that we have no control over. And so we really need the whole community to come together around this vision, and this goal to make it viable for the co-op, the farmers, and everybody else.
And sustainable, right? Word keeps coming up. Were you one of the first co-ops to form in Hawaii?
No, there's actually, Hawaii has a long history of co-ops, and the last time I saw this stat, and I'm not sure where we're exactly at now, but the last time I saw a stat on co-op numbers in Hawaii, there were about 40. So we're one of many. Now the co-ops that do exist in Hawaii they vary in what they do. So they're not all marketing cooperatives like us. That's the type of co-op we are, is a marketing co-op. Some co-ops are supply co-ops like Hikiola on Molokai. Others are utility co-ops like the utility on Kauai and the new solar utility on Molokai. Others are worker co-ops. With Spring Winds Bamboo is a great example of that in Kipahulu, Maui. So the co-ops themselves really differ in terms of what they do and what types of co-ops they are, but we're one of a whole family.
And quite a few in ag, it sounds like, are ag related, yeah. 8 years later, are you happy with the co-op model?
We could not have done this without the co-op model. I think the co-op model is intrinsic to who we are and the success we've had.
We thank Dana for sharing her mana'o and the story of Hawaiʻi Ulu Co-op's origins, growth, and the ways Hawaii agriculture producers can become more involved. If you want to know more about some of the topics we discussed, look for those links in the show notes. Mahalo. As I mentioned earlier, Seeds of Wellbeing is about ag producers in Hawaii, about helping them with issues that they may be having. You just mentioned some of them in our talk today, some of the issues that are ongoing, and so the Seeds of Wellbeing project is here to help talk about some of those issues and also any potential solutions that folks have. And so just putting it out there to you, anything you'd want to share with our Hawaii ag producer community about how to help get through the day, how to carry on, how to have that tenacity it takes to be an ag producer in Hawaii.
I guess I would just say that you have a lot of support structures available to you, and to reach out if you do need the support. Obviously, it's an extremely challenging endeavor to farm in Hawaii, but you don't need to do it alone. From food hubs like ourselves that are trying to create markets to, sort of other community-based support organizations like the Kohala Center and CTAR and, Go Farm and stuff. I think there's a lot of people that want to help farmers, but we can't unless you communicate your needs. And so just to reach out if you need help.
Great. And maybe eat breadfruit.
Well, that's for sure. Well, and plant breadfruit. Yes, if you are, below 1,000-foot elevation, and you don't grow breadfruit, let's get you some trees.
Yeah, and I think there's a number of varieties that you sell through the co-op. Is that on all the islands or that you have?
No,
Big Island?
we only sell on Big Island. That's right. There's a moratorium on transporting soil off Big Island due to ROD, so we don't get into that. But Noah, who I mentioned, my husband, he actually has set up a tissue culture lab in Komohana, and he is able to ship soilless trees inter-island. So wherever you are in the state, you can definitely access trees. Feel free to reach out to us if you have questions. We do have a tree order form on our website, and we do liaison kind of with Noah's lab. So if we get requests that we can't fulfill, we'll direct you to him.
That's great. Yeah, the only tip I have to share, I think, on all that is when you plant your ulu tree, make sure your chicken coop is right underneath it. The ulu loves it. It just that's my happiest ulu tree is the one under the chicken coop. The chicken coop is right under. Yes. And
make sure you have some sort of pig protection, either a really good fence or like individual tree cages.
Yes, we could have a whole nother episode on pigs, I'm sure, and probably should. But yes. Well, thanks so much for coming on and talking about Ulu Co-op. It's really interesting info. I think it's far-reaching what you're doing, and it seems like there's lots of opportunities for folks that might be interested. So thanks again for your time.
Thanks so much, Jim. It was fun.
The intention of these podcast series is to create a safe space for respectful and inclusive dialogue with people from across a broad and diverse spectrum involved in growing and making accessible the food we share together. A diversity of voices, perspectives, and experiences can serve to deepen mutual understanding, to spark creative problem solving, and provide insight into the complexities of our agricultural system. If you or listeners have experiences with Hawaii agriculture ecosystem, from indigenous methods, permaculture, smallholder farmers, to large, including multinational agricultural industrial companies, and everywhere in between, and you would like to share your story, please contact us. We welcome your voices and perspectives.